Welcome to Order Terrace Radio TV. We are back again today with a show that'll drive liberals and MAGA faithful wild. President Theodore Roosevelt, the true Make America Great president. Welcome, Brother Alexis.
Thank you, AJ. Always glad to be on Order Militaris Radio TV, breaking new ground and new horizons in independent Catholic media, where we'll tell you the truth, unfiltered by groupthink, political correctness, and Masonic categories of thought. And we try to be very faithful to our Lord here, and a lot of people, I guess you could say, we're making enemies all over the place simply for saying the truth, the historical truth. That's how far whacked out people are today. You can't even say the truth, they go wild on you. So this is a great topic. We're going to talk about a man who truly is one of the great presidents of the United States, in as much as you can praise a man who's not Catholic and didn't live by Catholic ideals, but nevertheless, as a politician, he did many things which were great for America and even great for the Catholic people of the Philippines.
Well, let us begin with who is Theodore Roosevelt?
Theodore Roosevelt. Most people, when they hear the word Theodore Roosevelt, maybe confuse him with the president during the Second World War, who was a distant cousin. But Theodore Roosevelt was not from the Midwest. He was from New York City, and he was from a business family. How familiar is that? So his family were mostly of Dutch descent. They had been merchants in Manhattan for generations. Very, I'd say, very well off and successful merchants. He was born on October 27th, 1858. That is just 3 years before the outbreak of the Civil War. And so he was too young really to know the war or anything about it. He was the second of 4 children. His father was Theodore Roosevelt Sr. His mother was Martha Stewart Bullock. And his father was a philanthropist. And he had an older sister, Anna, a younger brother, Elliot. He was, his younger brother, Elliot, was the father of First Lady Anna Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of Theodore's distant cousin, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So, though mainly of Dutch descent, he had in his ancestry Scotch-Irish, English, German, Welsh, and French ancestors. So he was a real American mixture, you might say. Mm-hmm. It's been for more than 5 generations. And he was a distant descendant of the Schuler family, one of the big Dutch families of New York City. And he was not, as a boy, he wasn't the kind of boy you would expect would become the president he became, because he suffered from very poor health and debilitating asthma. Back then, there was no known cure. He had asthma attacks that would make him feel like he was suffocating to death, and doctors couldn't do anything about it. So he was relatively terrorized by that in youth. And that kind of sickness can really strike a boy hard and make him, curl in on himself and never really develop any kind of character, kind of like in many, it's not infrequent, you see like inferiority complexes, they don't go out of the house or anything. But that wasn't Theodore. He fought it, and he was naturally energetic and inquisitive. At the age of 7, for example, he saw a dead seal at a local market. He bought the seal's head, and with 2 cousins, they formed a Roosevelt Museum of Natural History and put it on up for display. He learned the rudiments of taxidermy. So this was not a boy who was squirmish at stomach at all. He had learned how to skin animals and mount them and stuff them. He recorded his first observation of insects at the age of 9. So most kids at the age of 9 even aren't thinking yet. So he was a very intelligent boy, and this is going to mark his whole life. He took the initiative to understand problems and look for solutions, and to inquire about things in the world around him and appreciate the goodness he found in people and in places. And this is who he was as a boy, and this is what would make him great as a man.
Yeah. How did the importance of homeschooling develop President Theodore Roosevelt, and how is homeschool important today?
Yeah, President Theodore Roosevelt, was homeschooled, and I graduated university in anthropology. So as an anthropologist, I would say, as from what I see of his life, this is what profoundly characterized his life. Okay, so he was homeschooled by his parents with the help of tutors. He had excellent knowledge of geography, history, biology, French, and German. He didn't do so well in mathematics or classical languages, but the thing about homeschooling is what's the first thing it teaches your children? It teaches your children that we can do it on our own. Okay, we don't have to depend on an institution to give us that which is the most important thing in life, which is education. And second of all, it requires children to be inquisitive, and it teaches them to appreciate learning because their parents are the ones teaching them. So they have the greatest possible encouragement in education. Their own parents are teaching them. And second of all, it teaches them to be adventurous, because since their teachers are parents who don't have to follow strict schedules, the parents are more willing to let them follow their own personal interests, and that lights the desire of a youth to learn, to study, to investigate, to explore, to go out in the world and learn about things around him, not simply just repeat things as you might in school. And this we'll see in all his character. Everything he does is touched by that, and it's which gives him the ability to take initiatives that no one else thought of, would back, or would persevere in undertaking. So it was homeschooling that not only made him an intelligent and inquisitive man, but gave him the fortitude of character that we're going to see blossom into one of the great men of American history.
You left New York to go to, what was it, North Dakota, and start a ranch or something?
Yeah, at one point in his career, he had his father sent him to law school at Harvard, and then he went to law school in Columbia. He held office as an assemblyman in New York City, and then he served as a police commissioner in New York City. But after his career in Republican politics in New York kind of fizzled out, after being a state assemblyman, serving quite well, he decided to take his personal fortune, because he had inherited $125,000 from his father when his father passed away, and go west. So he had first visited the Dakota Territory in 1883 to hunt bison, and he returned there in mid 1880s to start a cattle business. He invested $14,000. He bought himself a ranch on the Little Missouri River. That's what he called it. This ranch, he called it Chimney Butte Ranch, and you can find photos of him dressed up in hunter's gear. And though he was a hunter, he was in favor of preserving the natural species of wild game, and he was one of the important figures in American history that promoted the the salvation of the species of North American bison, which have become such an iconic animal for the United States and for North America. In his day, there was only 400 of them left. And he in his interventions in establishing state parks, he saved that species, those species from extinction. So he was out there for a while until the great winter of 1886 was just about there 2-3 years, wiped out half his herd, and he lost 80,000 investment. And at that point, he returns east. He won't go west again except on outing trips and hunting trips. So he had a short stint as a rancher in the Midwest, but that helped him connect with a lot of people in the country, since few New Yorkers of his age did that.
Yeah. Let's see. How did he stand up to big corporations and Marxist groups?
Yeah, so in his political life, he was always against corruption. He came from an honest, upright family. His family didn't make money in shady deals or special favoritism from big Jewish banks. He wasn't involved in real estate speculation. They were honest business folks. So when he, in his political career, in his first half of it, he got appointed to be a commissioner in the federal government. For civil appointees, he rooted out corruption in Washington and in government appointments. But he was known for that even when he, in his political life in New York State, where he was a prominent Republican, always fighting corruption, whether it was in the police, whether it was in state government, whether it was big corporations that tried to maintain high prices or cheap workers out of honest wages. He wasn't involved in schemes that would buy up whole neighborhoods and drive people out of their houses, like or build a casino right over your house and take away your airspace with special funds from the government. He wasn't that kind of man at all. He was a true man of the people, a man for honesty. He was a true, he had really deep sense of what it meant to represent the people and serve the people as a politician rather than serve himself. So he was prominent in a thing called the Civil Service Commission. That's in the federal government, and it was his job to make sure that civil service laws, government employees and hirings was done fairly and honestly. He was the New York City Police Commissioner, and for a while, and as commissioner, he implemented regular inspections of firearms, annual physical exams. He appointed recruits on the basis of their physical and mental qualifications, not their party affiliations. He established a meritorious service medal system. He closed corrupt police hostelries, and he would go out on the streets late at night to see that officers were on their beats and doing their patrols and keeping the city safe. That's quite a figure. I don't think in modern times we've had any police commissioners that went on to higher offices. In the next administration, Republican administration, he was Assistant Secretary to the Navy, and he was big on building up the American Navy. And because of what he did to build up the American Navy, America takes a role in world politics for the next century up into our own time, in which America would dominate the seas of the world and dominate the entire geopolitical order. It begins with him, Assistant Secretary of Navy, building up the U.S. Navy and insisting the U.S. start building battleships, which was the capital ship of that era. And from then onward, the Navy starts expanding at a tremendous rate, so that we had the capacity in the First World War to keep the Allies supplied, and in the Second World War, control the North Atlantic and large sections of the Pacific and South Atlantic and South Pacific. So after that, of course, the American Navy is dominant on all seas. So he was in a key point at a key time. But not only his decision to strengthen the Navy, his quick action, because he was only Assistant Secretary of the Navy, but the Secretary of the Navy was a kind of sickly kind of guy that let him do what he wants. So when he saw the crisis coming into the war of Cuba, he ordered the Navy to prepare itself for war, and that was essential in the victory that would be had with the war in Cuba. So the war breaks out, and then we see that he is not just a great politician, a very honest man, but quite a courageous man, and quite a military leader.
Yeah. He did something that you don't find anywhere else today except Poland. He made sure the stores and bars and pubs were closed on Sunday.
Yeah. So in the time in which he was police commissioner in New York City, there were laws requiring, called blue laws, requiring pubs and bars to be closed on Sundays, but they were generally not well enforced, and there was a lot of corruption to not enforce them. But he made sure they were enforced. He was an upright Christian man, and there's certain things that shouldn't be done on the Lord's Day, and he felt it was in his duty as police commissioner to keep the law up, and he did. He wasn't like many politicians who let laws lapse, okay, or talk about how it would good to be restore them and then do nothing on their own. It wasn't the age of Twitter. He was a man of action, not talking. This gets back to our program we did, I think last week on Christian manhood. We live in an age where people think they're men by what they say or write on social media, not what they do. Well, Theodore Roosevelt was not a Twitter man. He was a man of action, a man of true deeds. And so he took no shame to enforce the law to uphold our Lord's Day. And it shows you how great a man he was. That is true greatness.
Yeah. Well, as lieutenant colonel during the American-Spanish War, the swamp hated his guts, made him wait a century for the Medal of Honor.
It made him wait a century. So the war breaks out and he resigns from his office as Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Can you imagine? Most politicians would say, there's a war on, I'm going to be the best assistant ever, so I'm going to build up my career. No, he wasn't a talker. He was a doer. He resigned. He went to San Antonio, Texas, and he raised a private regiment, the 1st U.S. Volunteer Cavalry Regiment. And this is absolutely amazing. We have not seen this virtue in the American presidency for a century, okay? And he gave a rallying talk. When the press heard what he was doing, the story became wildfire, the news, and people from all walks of life rushed down to San Antonio to follow Theodore Roosevelt, Colonel Roosevelt, into battle. And I just want to lead the kinds of people that joined up. Ivy League students, professional and amateur athletes, upscale gentlemen, cowboys, frontiersmen, Native Americans, hunters, miners, prospectors, former soldiers, tradesmen, and sheriffs. You had men from all walks of life join up, and it was privately financed. It was not government financed. So, but it wasn't just his willingness. He was a great orator. And I think, AJ, you can read us something of his speech to the Rough Riders, and that really galvanized them as a military unit and turned them into one of the great heroic units of the American military.
This was his final speech before he resigned his office to go down into Texas to the Naval War College. Let me get it here. A century has passed since Washington wrote, "To be prepared for war is the most effectual means to promote peace." We pay to this maxim the lip loyalty we so often pay to Washington's words, but it has never sunk deep into our hearts. Indeed, of late years, many persons have refused it, even the poor tribute of lip loyalty, of pride about the iniquity of war, as if somehow that was a justification for refusing to take the steps which can alone in the long run prevent war or avert the dreadful disasters it brings in its train. The truth of the maxim is so obvious to every man of really far-sighted patriotism that its mere statement seems trite and useless. It is not over credible to either our intelligence or our love of country that there should be, as there is, need to dwell upon and amplify such a truism. In this country, there is not the slightest danger of an overdevelopment development of warlike spirit. There never has been any such danger. In all our history, there has never been a time when preparedness for war was any menace to peace. On the contrary, again and again, we have owed peace to the fact that we were prepared for war. And in the only contest which we have had with a European power since the Revolution, the War of 1812, the struggle and all its attendant disasters were due solely to the fact that we were not prepared to face, and were not ready instantly to resent an attack upon our honor and our interests. While the glorious triumphs at sea which redeemed that war were due to the few preparations which we had actually made. We are a great peaceful nation, a nation of merchants and manufacturers, of farmers and mechanics, a nation of working men who labor incessantly with head or hand. It is idle to talk of such a nation ever being led into a course of wanton aggression or conflict with military powers by the possession of a sufficient navy. The danger is precisely the opposite character. If we forget that in the last resort we can only secure peace by being ready and willing to fight for it, we may some day have better cause to realize that a rich nation, which is slothful, timid, or unwieldy, is an easy prey for any people which still retains those most valuable of all qualities, the soldierly virtues. We, we but keep to the traditions of Washington, to the traditions of all great Americans who struggled for real greatness of America. When we strive to build up those fighting qualities for the lack of which in a nation, as in an individual, no refinement, no culture, no wealth, no material prosperity can atone. Preparation for war is the surest guarantee for peace. Arbitra- Arbitration is the excellent thing, but ultimately those who wish to see this country at peace with foreign nations will be wise if they place reliance upon a first-class fleet of first-class battleships, rather than on any arbitration treaty which the wit of man can devise. Nelson said that the British fleet was the best negotiator in Europe, and there was much truth in the saying. Moreover, while we are sincere and earnest in our advocacy of peace, we must not forget that ignoble peace is worse than any war.
Mm-hmm. A very true statement. This is the preparation is the best insurance for peace. Goes back to the general principle of self-defense. If you can defend yourself, you're not going to be enslaved, imprisoned, or exploited. But you're also probably not going to be attacked, because if you show that you can defend yourself, you will thwart the opportunist attacks of those who go after the weak. And so this is a general principle of state. And as Secretary of the Navy, he pursued that, but he also put it into effect as a private individual. And so That's what makes him so unique and as a man. A little point on geopolitics. Cuba was a Spanish possession, but the relationships between the United States and the Kingdom of Spain had eroded. Most people don't know that Spain went through 3 civil wars in the 19th century because the rightful heir to the throne had his right deprived from him from the part of the family through a female claimant to the throne who had no legal claim to the throne, who was backed by the Freemasons and the leftists, and they gained control of the Spanish kingdom. And the Carlists 3 times attempted to vindicate their right and lost. So Spain started taking a course that was Masonic and very corrupt. And so the Spanish possessions in the Caribbean, Cuba, Puerto Rico, were becoming things of contention with the United States. The U.S. did a lot of trade with Cuba on sugar and things like that. The critics of this war, saying America was greedy and colonial, really don't have much to stand for, because when this war breaks out, Cuba, Puerto Rico are possessions of Spain. And as the war ends, the United States only gets Puerto Rico. It doesn't claim, could have easily claimed Cuba if it was really imperialist, but it did not. Let the won independence for Cuba. Of course, Cuba from that point on doesn't do so well on its own and ends up being overrun by the communists 60 years later. Didn't really get enough support, but that has to do with American government that doesn't support Christian nations and never has. But what he did, raising his own troops and going off to war, was really, that's the epitome of true manliness and true heroism in the natural sense of it. And there to fight for his country. The question of whether the Spanish-American War was just or not has been debated long, because an American battleship blew up, and there was debates on how it blew up. And the ship was brought up from the depths several times and investigated by both parties. And I think recently its remains were dug up. But we now know that what caused it to explode was the fact that the coal and the colliery of the ship was wet and naturally began to combust. Okay, because you put water on coal and keep it hot, it will naturally start a chemical reaction that will lead it to get hotter and hotter and catch fire, and that's what caused the ship to blow up. It wasn't bombed by the Spanish, and there were recriminations on both sides. So objectively speaking, there wasn't a cause for war. But once war did break out, I think America declared war thinking their ship had been attacked. He was quick to fight for his country. And so from the point of view of material virtue, we can praise him for that. Formal virtue, a Catholic, I think, would have been a bit calmer head and urged peace, because after all, it's only one capital ship and you shouldn't go to war for one capital ship. But in many, whenever we look at the example of a man who's not Catholic, we can only admire certain aspects of it, from certain points of view. That's even true about many Catholic men. Only the saints can we admire at all angles and find something admirable. So, but his Rough Riders really did an amazing job. They landed in Cuba. They quickly overrun the enemy, and in their great battle with the name of the hill, get this correct. This battle on their famous battle was made into a movie, his charge up Kettle Hill on July 1st, 1898. His men, he lost, there was 1,000 men. His unit took 2,000 killed and 1,000 wounded, which was very heavy losses, but they took the hill. And the very next month, he urged that his men be pulled out because they were coming down with yellow fever. And so he not only did not let the victory go to his head and make him spin around and urge his men to do dangerous things, but his first concern was for the health and his life of his men, and he urged that his unit be moved back, and they would move back to Long Island where they could recover from the yellow fever. So great courage. If you watch that film, I think it's rather accurately done. He's right up there on the front line. He was I'm going to sit at the table and command my men, from a distance. He wasn't that kind of man. And as I said, we haven't had men like this for a long time. Even the generals from the Second World War, like Eisenhower, I don't think Eisenhower was ever in the front lines. He wasn't that kind of a man. So Roosevelt, what he did in the Spanish-American War, and you can find pictures of him with his 10th Cavalry Regiment, was something that really was seen by everyone in the country as truly heroic. And it was his heroism in this war which would propel him to the presidency of the United States, because Americans realized we need a man like this who is a true leader, a true man, a true American, and truly in favor of helping the little guy, as well as defending the nation in times of war.
Yeah. Let's see. How was Roosevelt made president?
No sooner does he get back in the United States with his unit and they're released from quarantine from yellow fever, that someone suggests he run for the Republican nomination in New York State. And he does, and he wins, and he becomes governor of New York. And there he shows that he really has the qualities of a president. New York State was called the Empire State. In 1900, it had a good part of all U.S. economic activity, maybe as much as 10 or 15% was in New York State. The first thing, as governor, he showed himself excellent in appointing honest, qualified men to all positions. He ran one of the most upright, transparent administrations that state had ever seen. He was not appointing idiots. He didn't have idiots around him telling to shut down the nation, and he certainly didn't listen to idiots. He was not that kind of a man. You could say he made New York great again. I don't think New York has ever had a governor of his quality. They usually, in recent decades, have been men of the most base morals and most stupid politics. In addition to that, he rooted out corruption. He fought companies that tried to exploit people. He insisted that if any company was doing business in the state by means of some special privilege from the government, because they had a right of way or they had a monopoly on an industry or something like that, that they would pay the state a percentage of their profits in return for the privilege. So he had kind of like a monarchical view of the state versus the corporation. Corporations did not like this guy. He was not a friend of big companies. He was a friend of the little guy. He didn't talk about, helping everyone and then only help big companies. He saw that people had jobs and could get to work, and that costs were fair, that companies were honest. He wanted fair rates on the railroads. Railroads were the main sources of transportation back then. He sought to diffuse conflict between employers and laborers. He was against radical Marxist organizations that wanted to incite certain sectors of the workforce or the poor. And he intervened quickly. He didn't sit around and let cities burn. He was a man that prevent conflict from taking place. One thing I find remarkable as a Franciscan, because of an order dedicated to peace, as throughout his life, you see him rushing to make peace between parties that aren't even under his control. As president, we'll see him work to promote peace between Japan and Russia. And the treaty that ends the the Japanese-Russian War was signed in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, in the United States because Roosevelt's intervention. In 1902, as president, when the conflict breaks out in Venezuela and not being able to pay its debts, and you have British and German navies off the coast of Venezuela, it's Roosevelt that intervenes to defuse the situation. When France and Germany nearly go to war over a dispute in Morocco in like 1903, he's the one that pushes for a conference that diffuses that and prevented the First World War from breaking out 10 years before it did. So this is a man that has to, on this point, we must, as Christians, praise him without any reservation, because being a peacemaker is one of the things that Christ from his own mouth praises. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. So he didn't talk about making peace and go to big conferences with televisors and everything, and then announce he had achieved something great and then nothing happens afterwards. No, there was peace after. When Roosevelt left the conference, there was peace. And same thing in labor negotiations. When he left the arbiters table, there was an agreement. This was a man of action. This was a man who didn't do things for show. He was not an actor. He wasn't a stage actor. He didn't dance to the cameras or the journalists. Though he had good reputation to the journalists. No, he was a man of action. And that is the kind of man that deserves praise.
Let's see. We know the swamp can be drained because Roosevelt did it.
Yes, Roosevelt did it. So after being a great governor of New York, the Republicans, on the spur of the moment in their next convention, they're like, why don't you run for vice president? And back then, the candidates for vice president were independent. They weren't chosen by the leading candidate. So the Republican president was running for a second term. So the Republicans nominated him, and he ends up winning the vice presidential nomination and goes on to victory because the incumbent wins his own term again. So he got this position because the previous vice president had died of a heart failure. And while vice president, he really didn't like his office because vice presidents don't do much. He only appeared in the Senate 4 times the first year of his office. But as Providence would happen, he was the right man in the right place, because on September 6, 1901, President McKinley, while attending the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, was shot and murdered by Leon Czolgosz, a Marxist Jew, a radical anarchist. It was just a gun pulled out in the middle of the crowd, and bang, bang, the president was dead. It took him 7 days to die from his wounds. And here we see the character of Roosevelt. Did he immediately get on a train and proclaim himself president like one president did after Kennedy was assassinated? No, he's continued his hunting in the Adirondacks and Vermont, New York border. That's the Adirondacks. And when he learned the president was an imminent death, and he took a train, and it was while he was on a train that he was informed the president had died. He didn't rush to take the office. He didn't usurp authority. He let the absolute disaster and calamity of the moment not move him in the bit. This not only shows that he had a tremendous fortitude of character, but of mind. He was not a man that was ambitious. He was not a man that wanted to grab other people's authority. If he ran and accepted authority, it was always with honesty, dignity, propriety, and self-control. And this is extremely rare. We don't find this in politics anymore. And so it was at the Ansley Wilcox House on September 14th that he was sworn in as the nation's 26th president. And he served his first term without a vice president, because this was before the 25th Amendment, and so there was no constitutional procedure to replace a vice president if he should ascend to the presidency during office. And it was by this unusual means that a man who probably would have never by himself been chosen by the Republicans to be president, because he had kind of a stormy relationship with the Republican Party, becomes president of the United States and a great American leader. And if you study anything in American history, the name of Theodore Roosevelt will come up. I remember even in civics classes as a young man, this was like one of the last presidents you'd study was Theodore Roosevelt. Almost no one can fault him for anything he did in his presidency, and he was truly, you could say, make America great. He didn't have to make America great again. He was involved in making America great for the first time, and so his policy as a president shows that this was a man for the people. Wasn't a man for the cameras, wasn't a man for the wealthy, wasn't a man of slogans. So he vigorously enforced the 1890 Sherman Antitrust Act to prevent companies from using monopolies and exploiting the poor by high prices. That's something that only served the poor. It only served the average guy. He didn't get money under the table for this. He broke up railroad trusts. He broke up security trusts. He forcibly regulated Standard Oil, which was the Rockefeller Corporation, and the Rockefellers are the ones who are behind Bilderbergers and the whole shutdown and lockdown today. So he was the enemy of the Rockefellers from the start. And that's quite unusual because most politicians of that age were corrupted by the Rockefellers. To prevent these kinds of problems from arising nationwide, he pushed the Congress and signed into law the United States Department of Commerce and Labor, which controlled the relationship between employers and workers and saw that workers would not be defrauded and that corporations would follow the laws and not get involved in monopolies that would exploit either the worker or the poor. That is truly making America great. That is truly defending the poor. That's what a president's there for. He's there for the people. He's not supposed to be there for the corporations. We haven't seen a president like this ever. I mean, even Reagan is praised, but Reagan broke up unions. And this is a man that didn't break up unions. He sought honest, fair wages for workers. And that was unheard of in his in the coal strike of 1902, he feared that violence would break out. People told him to bring in the federal troops, break up those workers, beat them up. No. He urges arbitration. He gets both sides to sit down. He diffuses the situation. And that way he gets the workers a fair wage for their work. And he keeps America's fuel supply, because coal was one of the main fuels back then, running. And once again, we see him as a peacemaker, but a peacemaker is there to help the poor and avoid situations that would be damaging to both sides. This was not a man who watched cities burn and wondered whether he should intervene. This is a man who went to the conflict before it even broke out and saw that there would be no violence on either side, that people would sit down and talk rationally. And that is a great president. So then he rooted out the deep state corruption. You might say he drained the swamp. When he enters as president, he finds the Indian Service, that's the government, the branch of the federal government involved in caring for Indians on reservations, the land office involved overseeing federal lands, and the post office full of corruption, and he cleans out all three of them. He doesn't talk about it and lament about it and do nothing. He cleaned it out. Why he cleaned out the Indian Service, whose agents were cheating the Creek Indians and various tribes out of their own land. So he defended the Native Americans by cleaning out corruption in the federal government. He removed land fraud and speculation involved in the land office from the sale of timber and land and federal timberlands in Oregon. And even to the point of forcing the General Land Office Commissioner Bingerman to resign from office. He appointed a special prosecutor and obtained 146 indictments involving the Oregon Land Office bribery. He didn't just talk about maybe the Attorney General should do something. No, he told the Attorney General what to do, and he got him to do something. So, this wasn't a president who played in a sandbox, and claimed to be victimized by everyone. He brought 44 indictments against employees of the U.S. Post Office for bribery and fraud. So he didn't complain about problems in the post office. He indicted the crooks and sent them to prison. Um, um, he even indicted the U.S. Senator John Mitchell for bribery to expedite legal land patents, and who was found guilty and sentenced to 6 months in prison. So he even went after a corrupt senator. He didn't play footsie games with politicians. They're corrupt. He got the Congress to pass the 1906 Hepburn Act, and he forced railroads to give fair rates for transportation of goods and services. And he established the Interstate Commerce Commission with this authority to regulate railway rates. And this helped the U.S. economy boom tremendously with much lower rates, which from that point on were charged by how much weight you're shipping to such a distance. That's not where it ended. He urged Congress to pass the Meat Inspection Act of 1906, because a lot of the soldiers in the Spanish-American War died of food poisoning, ptomaine poisoning, because the meat that had been shipped to them was poisoned. So he passed the Meat Inspection Act, which is, even to this day, is one of the preeminent meat inspection acts in the whole world. You can go to Australia, to the port of Perth in Western Australia, and find a U.S. meat inspector, because meat cannot be shipped out of that port to the United States unless it is first inspected by a U.S. federal official. That's how great this system is. And he's made it, from this point of the establishment of this act, dying from being food poisoned from meat becomes a rarity in the U.S., where it had been very common before. And then he gets Congress to pass the Pure Food and Drug Act, which outlaws the sales of all false medicines, or medicines sold with false claims, or medicines containing dangerous substances. You know, like those vaccines today that contain all kinds of mercury and aluminum. He outlawed them. He didn't play footsie with. He didn't give money to the vaccine industry. He didn't give money to them. He passed a law to put them in prison and to regulate what they're doing, and to defend the common guy, the common American, from being poisoned by his doctor with false medicines. He banned misleading labels, preservatives that contain harmful chemicals. Not only from being manufactured, but being sold and shipped in the United States. And so great was the effect of that bill, that the American School of Hygiene awarded him, made him honorary president from 1907 to 1908. And he did a lot also for orphan children. But probably is best known for what he did as saving the wilderness of America for future generations, so that all citizens could enjoy it. And he founded the American park system. He got bills passed enabling him by executive order to establish parks and forests. Just to look, he's established 51 bird reserves, 150 national forests, 18 national monuments. This all is a part of the 1906 Antiquities Act that he passed, because the natural beauty of the land was called a natural antiquity. And he put 150 million acres into reserve forest land, and he established 120 forest reserves in 31 states using mostly executive orders. And yet he wasn't a kind of a snobbish, selfish man, because when Congress was afraid he was reserving too much land, they passed a bill to take that power away from him. And he signed that bill into law and gave up that power, because that's what the people wanted. That's what their representatives wanted. But before doing it, so he established 21 more forest reserves than the day before. And so here was a president who knew how to use his authority, and yet respected the will of the people's representatives and in a matter. And that kind of a balance of mind, you don't see it anymore. That's a man who knew how to control himself.
Before I get to his little book, The Student's Life, no other president has balanced the budget and gave the country a surplus in wealth.
Yeah, that's what you call making America great. I think it's his Dutch ancestry. They're very frugal in business. So you would expect that the Wikipedia article on Theodore Roosevelt would mention that. No, that's not even found in his domestic policies. It's completely censored from history.
Mm-hmm.
That's how much the left doesn't want you realizing it, because the left wants to bankrupt the nation so as to destroy it. But to balance the budget and have a surplus is unheard of. Presidents don't even advocate that anymore. And we won't talk about a president who would spend $6 trillion to solve a problem that he caused by shutting a nation down.
Mm-hmm. When President Theodore was being attacked, what was it, about a month ago? And they were talking about removing his statue outside of the museum. His dad found it in New York City. I was like, I better get some of his books. So I went on to Amazon. I had a 3 set of his books on sale. Rough Riders, The War of 1812, Naval History, and this little gem of his speeches from was it 1907 Chicago? 1905 in Chicago, called The Strenuous Life. The first one. I wish to preach not the doctrine of ignoble ease, but the doctrine of strenuous life, the life of toil and effort, of labor and strife, to preach the highest forms of success which comes, not to the man who desires mere easy peace, but to the man who does not shrink from danger, from hardship, or from bitter toil, and who out of these wins the splendid ultimate triumph. A life of slothful ease, a life of that peace, which springs merely from lack either of desire or power to strive after great things, is as little worthy of a nation as of an individual. I ask only that what every self-respecting American demands from himself and from his sons shall be demanded of the American nation as a whole. Who among you would teach your boys that ease, that peace, is to be the first consideration in their eyes, to be the ultimate goal after which they strive? You have done your share, and more than your share, in making America great, because you neither preach nor practice such a doctrine. You work yourselves, and you bring up your sons to work. If you are rich and worth your salt, you will teach your sons that though they may have leisure, it is not to be spent in idleness. For wisely used leisure merely means that those who possess it, being free from necessity of working for their livelihood, are all the more bound to carry on some kind of non-remunerative work in science, in letters, in art, in exploration, in historical research, work of the type we most need in this country, the successful carrying out of which reflects most honor upon the nation. We do not admire the man of timid peace. We admire the man who embodies victorious effort, the man who never wrongs his neighbor, who is prompt to help a friend, but who has the virile qualities necessary to win in the stern life of actual life, stern strife of actual life. It is hard to fail, but it is worse never to have tried to succeed. In this life, we get nothing save by effort. Freedom from effort in the present merely means that there has been stored up effort in the past. A man can be freed from the necessity of work only by the fact that he or his fathers before him have worked to good purpose. If the freedom thus purchased is used aright, and the man still does actual work, though of a different kind, whether as a writer or a general, whether in the fields of politics or in the fields of exploration or in adventure, he shows he deserves his good fortune. But if he treats this period of freedom from the need of actual labor as a period not of preparation, but a mere enjoyment, even though perhaps not a vicious enjoyment, he shows that he is simply a cumberer of earth's surface, and he surely unfits himself to hold his own with his fellows if the need to do so should arise again. A mere life of ease is not in the end a very satisfactory life, and above all, it is a life which ultimately unfits those who follow it for serious work in the world.
Excellent, excellent speech. That totally embodies all the characteristics we see in his life and which we have spoken of today. That's excellent. And it's completely directed against the vices of our age where people sit around wasting the whole youth playing video games, sitting down on the couch. You know, what does he say there? The life of encumbering the earth, doing nothing, you know? He would really rail against what's going on in the country. Or presidents who spend their presidency playing golf, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of things like visiting the troops, visiting the people around the country, you know, being there for them.
Oh, I want to see if we can get this one in. Hopefully, it won't be censored.
Well, now Ordo Militaris Radio broadcasts from its own website, so we cannot be censored by anyone anymore. So all you poor little Marxist deep state trash out there, sorry, you're going to have to go harass someone else. Just have to share that little tidbit with you to sour your day.
In the last analysis, a healthy state can exist only when the men and women who make it up lead clean, vigorous, healthy lives, when the children are so trained that they shall endeavor not to shirk difficulties, but to overcome them, not to seek ease, but to know how to wrest triumph from toil and risk. The man must be glad to do a man's work, to dare and endure, and to labor. Excuse me. To keep himself and to keep those dependent upon them. The woman must be the housewife, the helpmeet of the homemaker, the wise and fearless mother of many healthy children.
He's writing like a Catholic, and this man wasn't Catholic, you know. So that's a wonderful. That should be shared. Catholics should share that everywhere. They should make a meme out of that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's from his book, A Strenuous Life.
Yeah. Let's see here. We of this generation do not have to face a task such as that our fathers faced, but we have our tasks, and woe to us if we fail to perform them. We cannot, if we would play the part of China and be content to rot by inches in ignoble ease within our borders, taking no interest in what goes on beyond them, sunk in the scrambling commercialism, heedless of the higher life, the life of aspiration, of toil and risk, busying ourselves only with wants of our bodies for the day until we should find beyond a shadow of a question what China has already found, that in this world a nation that has trained itself to a career of unwarlike and isolated ease is bound, and in to go down before other nations which have not lost the manly and adventurous qualities. If we are to be really great people, we must strive in good faith to play a great part in the world. We cannot avoid meeting great issues. All that we can determine for ourselves is whether we shall meet them well or ill. In 1898, we could not help being brought face to face with the problem of war with Spain. All we could decide was whether we should sink like cowards from the contest or enter into the abasement beseemed a brave and high-spirited people, and once in, whether failure or success should crown our banners. So it is now we cannot avoid the responsibilities that confront us in Hawaii, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. All we can decide is whether we shall meet them in a way that will redound to the national credit, or whether we shall make our dealings with these new problems a dark and shameful page in our history. To refuse to deal with them at all merely amounts to dealing with them badly. We have given problem to solve. We have a given problem to solve. If we undertake the solution, there is, of course, always danger that we cannot possibly solve it aright. But to refuse to undertake the solution simply renders it certain that we cannot possibly solve it aright. The timid man, the lazy man, the man who distrusts his country, the over-civilized man who has lost the great fighting, masterful virtues, the ignorant man, the man of dull mind, whose soul is incapable of feeling the mighty lift that thrills stern men with empires in their brains. All these, of course, shrink from seeing the nation undertake its new duties, shrink from seeing us build a navy and an army adequate to our needs, shrink from seeing us do our share of world's work by bringing order out of chaos in the great fair tropic islands from which the valor of our soldiers and sailors have driven the Spanish flag. These are the men who fear the strenuous life, who fear the only natural life which is really worth leading. They believe in the cloistered life which saps the hardy virtues in the nation, as it saps them in the individual, or else they are wedded to that base spirit of gain and greed which recognizes the commercialism, the be all end all of national life. And instead of realizing that, though an indispensable element, it is, after all, but one of the many elements that go to make up true national greatness. No country can long endure if its foundations are not laid deep in the material prosperity which comes from thrift, from business energy and enterprise, from hard, unsparing effort in the fields of industry activity. But neither was any nation ever yet truly great if it relied upon material prosperity alone. All honor must be paid to the architects of our national prosperity. The great captains of industry have built our factories, our railroads, to the strong men who toil for wealth with brain and hand. For great is the debt of the nation to these in their kind, but our debt is yet greater to the men whose highest type is to be found in the statesman like Lincoln, the soldier like Grant. They showed by their lives that they recognized the law of work, the law of strife. But toil to win a competence for themselves, those dependent upon them. But they recognized that there were yet other and even loftier duties, duties to the nation and duties to the race.
Yeah, so this is a speech he gave, I imagine, while he was in the Secretary of the Navy or as president.
I think
So
President.
as president. So as a Catholic and a Franciscan, I have to agree with some of it and disagree with other. To say that the cloistered life leads you to be inactive is completely misunderstands what the cloister is about. But I don't think he understands what the cloister was about, and he's using cloistered life in the secular sense of someone who stays home and does nothing. Okay. His whole talk is about there are higher ideals to live by, not just avarice and self-interest, and that is true. but he's giving a speech in the matrix of American imperialism, Americanism, where America is seen to be the source of civilization, without any kind of critical recognition of the fact that our form of government, not being specifically Christian, is actually not a superior form of government or civilization. But you can see why he rallied people so much and won his reelection so well. I think all the northern states voted for him. Only the South was opposed to him, and that was mostly because he had Booker Washington to dinner at the White House. And the South, the Democrats, were all bigots, and they're still bigots. And they were all anti-black, and they're still anti-black. They just talk about exploiting blacks today. That's the only reason why they tolerate them. And so he was a great American imperialist that was the real spirit of the age. And you can see why the Americans would re-elect him and why his name would go on. He really lays the American foreign policy down in that speech of how American is to take a bigger role in the world, which she ends up doing in the First and Second World and even the post-war period, where now America is looked at as kind of like the policeman of the world. Though since the time of Clinton, it's kind of, our American power has kind of been waning around the world, and we've had so many idiots in the presidency, it's not surprising. But if we had a great man in the presidency, America would be truly great again. But that time hasn't come. The parties won't allow us to have a man of that quality in, you know.
Anything else? How did he die?
So we should mention his project was the Panama Canal. If it wasn't for Roosevelt, there wouldn't be a canal in Panama, which greatly encouraged economic development of the United States, so that the eastern ports could ship readily to the Orient and vice versa. After he served his term as president, because he was getting old, he traveled the world. Even as a boy with his father, he traveled to the Alps and to Egypt. But after his presidency, he goes to Africa. You can find pictures of him. He hunted elephant in an age in which there were a lot more elephants and there was no politics against him. He was a big game hunter without any shame. He and his companions killed or trapped 11,400 animals. I want to make a point about that. It's not a crime to kill an animal or eat an animal or use its skin. God created the animals for mankind. He did not create animals for themselves, okay? However, when you're talking about species that are near extinction, it is very wrong to kill them for sport, because their rarity puts in risk their continued existence, and they're a gift of God to us. But in his age, that wasn't a problem, okay? So he was a big game hunter from that point of view. And certainly there's nothing wrong hunting big game when there's a species of them that has incredible numbers of them, like our deer in the United States today. So he went on safari, tour a trip of Europe, Egypt, Africa. He visited heads of state. He was going to even meet with the Pope, but he had a dispute with a group of Methodists, and so he gave up his meeting with the Pope. There ended up being a schism in the Republican Party. He was considering running for the election of 1912, but he didn't make headway in that. On August, the other important points in his life, on October 14th, 1912, while campaigning in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, he was shot by a saloon keeper named John Fleming Schrank. The bullet lodged in his chest after penetrating his steel eyeglass case and passing through a thick 50-page single-folded copy of the speech entitled "Progressive Cause Greater Than Any Individual," which he was carrying in his jacket. Those two things probably saved his life. Mm-hmm. The crowds would have lynched his assailant, but Roosevelt pleaded for mercy. His assailant was immediately disarmed, by a Czechoslovak immigrant. From his experience as a hunter, he knew that since he wasn't coughing blood, the bullet hadn't reached his lung. So he declined suggestions to go to the hospital immediately. Can you imagine? He delivered his scheduled speech with the bullet wound in his chest. He spoke for 90 minutes and then went to the hospital. An x-ray showed that the bullet had lodged near his chest muscle but did not penetrate the lung cavity. And so the doctors, because of the state of surgery and the age, decided to leave the bullet in place rather than risk rupturing his lung by removing it. And so he carried the bullet with him the rest of his life. In 1913, 1914, still with a bullet in his chest, he goes on a South American expedition and financed by the American Museum of Natural History. And it was kind of a haphazard kind of an expedition. They nearly starved to death and were lost in the Amazon. Their expedition was to navigate a certain river, but he saw it through. In his final years, he returned to the United States. He was upset with his Wilson administration for in the way in which he had acquired the Panama Canal zone for the United States. He disagreed a lot with the Wilson administration. He was one of the early supporters of the Leagues of Nations. He strongly supported the Allies at the outbreak of the First World War. He demanded harsher policies towards Germany, especially regarding the submarine warfare. He was really upset by the atrocities of the German army in Belgium. And in 1917, he sought and obtained from Congress authority to raise 4 more divisions of the Rough Riders, and he put Major Frederick Russell Burnham in charge. But the president, President Wilson, being envious of Roosevelt, chose not to send the unit to Europe. Can you imagine? Mm-hmm. Out of spite, to not send a great man into battle. Wilson becomes the archetype of all the presidents since Roosevelt, the absolute scurrilously backstabbing piece of trash that should have never been elected to office and only cares about his public reputation and not how much he screws up the country or the world. That was Wilson. And Wilson is responsible for the whole travesty on how the First World War ends with the Versailles Peace, which so outrages the German people that it leads to the Second World War. He was a leading contender for the 1920 Republican nomination. But he died on January 5th, 1919, after suffering breathing problems. He had been treated by his physician, George Fowler. He felt better and went to bed. His last words were, "Please put out that light, James," to his family servant, James E. Amos. Between 4 and 4:15 the next morning, he died in his sleep at Sagamore Hill after a blood clot that had detached from a vein traveled to his lungs. He was 60 years old, and upon receiving word of his death, his son Archibald telegraphed his siblings, "The old lion is dead." His former vice president, Thomas Marshall, said of him, "Death had to take Roosevelt sleeping, for if he had been awake, there would have been a fight." There was a private farewell in the North Room at Sagamore Hill. The funeral was celebrated at Christ Episcopal Church in Oyster Bay. And present at his funeral were Vice President Thomas R. Marshall, Charles Evan Hughes, Warren Harding, Henry Cabot Lodge, and William Howard Taft. He was buried in Young's Memorial Cemetery. The streets were lined with squads of mounted policemen who had ridden from New York City to attend the funeral of their former commissioner. So that's how he passed away, and that was in the year 1919, just at the end of the Second World War. Of the First World War, excuse me. Yeah. So, Let's talk about his religion, since we're Catholics. People want to know what religion. He was a lifelong adherent of the Reformed Church in America, which is part of the Dutch Reformed Church. That was his religious affiliation, though he was buried in an Anglican church. You see that. So just that little thing.
Who was Pope at the time he was supposed to meet?
That probably, let's see, that would have been, I think, Benedict the 15th at that time. Benedict the 15th.
Man, if the Methodists didn't get in the way, he would probably have been converted.
The fact that he would want to meet the Pope really shows that he was not a bigot, because in that age, to meet the Roman Pontiff was considered something much, but probably because he was an ex-president, he was invited, and he should not have allowed the Methodists to involve him in a dispute. Theodore Roosevelt, U.S. president, who made America great.
Yeah. Let's see, tomorrow's show, we're going to do an investigation show as best we can do about the traditionalist movement inside the church. And, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. We'll talk about what it really means to be a traditional Catholic and why a lot of groups pretend to be traditional Catholics to defraud, hoodwink, mind control, and exploit the Catholic faithful, and to damage any possibility of a true Catholic revival in the church.
Yeah. You've been listening and watching Watermelon Radio TV. Go to ordo-militaris.net. There you can listen to our own personal broadcast on the website, controlled by only us. After long hours of work.
And don't forget, if you appreciate Ordo Militaris Radio TV, at the bottom of any show page, to make a free will offering as a kind of virtual subscription. We want to thank the individuals who have made 2 individual $100 gifts, and the individuals pledging $20 a month. And we encouraged you to become a supporter of Ordo Militaris Radio TV, so we can expand the services we offer. And now that we're putting the programs on our own server to prevent interruptions and censorship that we experience in a very vicious way from the previous company we dealt with, it's going to cost us money to have more visitors, and more people listening to the program. So it costs us, yes, it does cost us money for you to listen to our program. So please consider a donation to Ordo Militaris Radio TV.
Yep, and you can get that flag as well, and it'll also help the apostolate.
Yeah, so at ordo-militaris.us, you can order the Lepanto flag. I guess I can't really turn the camera and get out of the way, maybe. And it's a meter by a meter and 8. It's a historical reproduction of the flag that flew at the Battle of Lepanto and was raised to open the battle. And it has an image of Christ crucified, and the 4 naval powers, Catholic naval powers, were at the battle. If you go to ordo-militaris.us, then click the tab for shop, and then go down to flags. You can read all about this flag and how to get one. There's the large size, and then there's the small size. And if you get the large size, half the proceeds will go to Ordo Militaris Radio TV.
Yeah. All right. See you tomorrow on Ordo Militaris Radio TV. And please like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, BitChute channel. And still waiting for our first follower on Mixcloud. Yeah. Share our programs, listen to them, upload them, download them, whatever Mixcloud allows you to do to them. Just share them, folks. And see you tomorrow. This is Ordo Militaris Radio TV. Signing off. Deus Volt.
Deus Volt.